Hello everyone. For this short video lecture, I want to discuss Eastern religions. You see our chart here with Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Scholars throughout time, history, and throughout the world have typically identified these five as the major world religions, also known as the five great world religions. For this chart, though, out of these five, only two are actually Eastern religions, and that would be Hinduism and Buddhism, the first two. So the two on the left here. So I would like to discuss these two religions out of the five great world or major religions. These two, Hinduism and Buddhism, which again are Eastern. There's other Eastern religions, so we can briefly talk about Confucianism and Taoism and Shinto as well. They're not on this chart, because again, this chart is just the five great major world religions. But we can discuss Confucianism and Taoism, Shinto briefly after we review this chart. So Hinduism is the world's oldest religion, still in dominant practice in the world today. It counts about 1.1, slightly over 1 billion people worldwide, though about 90% of that Hindu population resides in its native homeland, today what we call the country of India, which is in the Eastern world. India itself has about 1.3 billion people, the second most populous country in the world, second only to China. So it is the world's, by nature, automatically, India is the world's largest democracy. It's a capitalistic economic system as well, too, having gained its independence from the British colonial empire in the late 1940s itself. But India is extremely inclusive. Pretty much every religion has some type of presence or population, albeit small, in the country of India. India is probably about 70, the country itself is 75% Hindu. And then, 25% represented by so many other religions, with Islam and Christianity. A couple, not too many, but pockets of Buddhism. Jainism, Sikhism, or Sikhism are definitely populated in India as well too. But so 90% of the Hindu global population still lives in India. India, the country itself, is about 70 to 75% Hindu. Hinduism is so old, we don't know who the founder is. The historical founder is completely unknown, because Hinduism is about 4,000 to 5,000 years old, believe it or not. Not many things continue to exist and persist for 5 millennia. Hinduism does, though it has gone through several waves or layers of evolution naturally, with so much history behind it. So it goes back to somewhere around 2,000 BC, maybe perhaps as far back as 3,000 BC, thus making it again 4,000 to 5,000 years old. So we really have no idea who the historical founder of Hinduism is. That's how old it is. But the human life in this world is Maya. The purpose is to see reality, our place in it, the world, the universe, existence itself correctly. So we have to penetrate or break through Maya. Maya is illusion, veiled, covered up. We normally see the world incorrectly through the lens of separation, of isolation, of creating dualities, where it's me versus you, I'm a separate entity, apart and distinct individual from everything and everyone else. We don't see reality correctly. That's Maya. We have to break through it. We have to overcome it, obliterate it. Maya. We should see everything as interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. Whereas I'm not an individual, I'm in full connection with everything and everyone else. So reality is one, not two. We don't create separations or levels of distinction or dualities. We are in full union with the divine, with this ultimate sacred entity, the highest expression of sacredness, The entire universe itself, and this is because the entire universe itself, everything and everyone in it, is a full extension of the divine. The ultimate expression of sacredness and divinity in the world is Brahman in Hinduism. We are an extension of it. You, me, we, everyone, everything is an extension of it. So thus there's no separation, ultimately, between me and you and me, us and them, us and the world, me and the world, you and the world. Everything is Brahman. So thus there is no distinctions. This has heavy, major ethical responsibilities and context to it as well too. So the problem is this delusion of separation, this foolishness, this ignorance, to think that we are separated, that we have an individual notion. God, Brahman, residing in us is our soul. That's the Atman, according to Hinduism. The Atman is in full union with the Brahman. Atman is Brahman, so there's even no distinction or duality there of Atman versus Brahman or Brahman versus Atman. The Atman is the Brahman within us. But that doesn't make me special, because your Atman is the Brahman within you. And so thus everything is Brahman. That joins us, that unites us, that brings us together in a full connection. That doesn't separate us, that unites us. So this notion of an individual, private, finite self, that needs to be rejected and denied. So we have to break through Maya and realize the interconnection that we all share with the Brahman. So this Atman does go through cycles of reincarnation. We want to break through reincarnation, though. We don't want to continue this cycle of samsara, of rebirth, of reincarnation, transmigration of the soul of the Atman. Rebirth is the product of failure in your previous life. You have more to make up. That notion of karma. Karma is you reap what you sow. Good begets good, bad begets bad. Or good generates, fosters, creates more good. Bad generates, fosters, creates more bad. So we have to make up for that bad that we've done previously in the current life or in previous lives. So karma shapes, governs, administers samsara. We are the self-architect of our own rebirth, of our own cycle of samsara. We can't blame this on any divine retribution. Our own karma comes back to us, good and bad. So it shapes future events in the current life, but also future lives and rebirth and samsara. So when you're reborn, we're reborn back in this world. And we don't want that. So samsara is like the fundamental problem of human existence because of negative karma. Something that we need to overcome. We definitely need to overcome it. Finally, when we do break through the cycle of samsara through wisdom, viewing the world correctly, breaking through Maya, rejecting all dualities and separation, viewing the world and reality through a monistic lens, monism, seeing that everything and everyone, the entire universe, is an extension of the Brahman. And that's our shared sacred source, is the Brahman. And so we too are Brahman, and we should treat each other as such. So we have good karma, we can break through samsara, and finally attain, fulfill our ultimate destiny, the afterlife, if you will, moksha. Moksha, liberation, freedom, deliverance, release from the cycle of samsara. A full union with the Brahman, because we realize that's all that we are to begin with. And so there's nothing left. There's nothing else to shed or negate or overcome. So now we have full union with the Brahman because that's all that we see. That's all that we are. To do this, there's different forms of yogas. Yoga, union, yoke, union with the divine, these different paths to the divine, to Brahman. Devotion yoga, bhakti yoga, knowledge yoga, jnana yoga, And then the more physical types of yoga with the body, hatha yoga, kundalini yoga, a focus on chakras, spiritual centers or wheels of energy throughout the body and above, the crown above. We can do these different yogas. We can be devoted to a god or a goddess, an ancestor, something in nature, an animal, a guru, holy teacher, person. We express this devotion to them with home worship, mandir, temple worship, sacrifices to them, the fruit, the milk, the honey, certain type of clarified water, flowers to the temple, to the god or goddess of our choice. Bhakti yoga is probably the most common form of yoga in Hinduism today. There's karma yoga, always being mindful of your actions, making sure they always are good, flowing from a proper view of reality that's monistic instead of dualistic, seeing the Brahman in everyone and in everything, and that's obviously heavily impacting, um, your notion of being good to because you're obviously treating everyone, seeing everyone as Brahman. There's sacred texts, for sure, many, many, many sacred texts in Hinduism. This next chart, though, is on sacred texts, so we'll kind of save that for there. But we have the Vedas, the Gitas. We talked about yoga. There's many different celebrations and rituals for sure in Hinduism. The Kumbh Mela usually draws around 60 to 120 million people on pilgrimage. A famous site in India for Hinduism. It's on a 12-year cycle of pilgrimage. But for Hinduism, it's probably the most open, diverse religion. There's no basic definition. So everything I review with Hinduism here today is what commonly, people would look at. The most majority understanding of Hindus within their religion of Hinduism. So there's no basic definition because there's no list of beliefs that are mandatory and agreed upon. There's no set of rituals or practices that are universally binding and agreed upon that you must do, just as we said with belief that you must believe. It's a completely open religious tradition, the most open for sure in comparison to others. And I guess we can look at the sacred texts, but Buddhism has, so there's our basic points on Hinduism. The Vedas, where we go. The Vedas are the oldest. They go back to around the earliest portions of the Vedas go back to around 1500 BC. It's basically 4 collections, 4 books put together in one book called the Vedas, which is just wisdom in Sanskrit. The Upanishads are the conclusion, the ending to each of those 4 books of the Vedas, which challenge and critique some things that were said earlier in the Vedas, so they're kind of isolated and seen as their own sacred text. The Brahmayanas, the Ramayana, Puranas, the Bhagavad Gita, Laws of Manu. There are so many sacred texts in Hinduism. It's such an open, fluid, diverse religion. How do you have one sacred text when you can have many, especially when you have 4,000 to 5,000 years of history behind you? So that's some brief points on Hinduism. Buddhism is in some respects a protest religion out of Hinduism. Founded by the Buddha around 500 BC, he was born as Prince Siddhartha Gautama in 563 BC, and it is attributed with a traditional 80 years of life, so he dies around 483 BC. He becomes the Buddha, the awakened one, around when he's 29, 30 years old. But his main teaching is that life is dukkha. Life, as it's typically lived, as it's conventionally lived, is full of suffering, or dukkha, dislocation. Life is thrown off course. Life is disjointed, out of whack, off base, missing the target. It's full of suffering. Suffering in its broad range and spectrum. The full whole context of suffering. So not just the unimaginable pain and misery, but just the generalized notion of misfortune, discontent, unhappiness. Also, those moments of suffering in life too. Reality is one. We have to see reality correctly. Break through. The notion of Maya does carry over from Hinduism into Buddhism, to be honest. So break through the delusion of separation, that you are an isolated, separate, distinct self. For Buddhism, break through the notion that you're a permanent, eternal, perpetual, unchanging self too. There is no self in Buddhism. There is no Atman. There is no soul, self, persona, core, nature, identity. We have no soul. We have no permanent, perpetual self. All we are, like other objects, is a grand total of smaller pieces put together. But those smaller pieces that make up a chariot or a car or your pen, your cell phone, are you yourself, me, myself, we ourselves. We are a totality of smaller pieces put together. But those smaller pieces aren't eternal or everlasting. Those smaller pieces change from one moment of time to the next, regardless of what that measurement of time is. So if all the smaller pieces put together are changing, then how can those smaller pieces added up and put together equal a perpetual self? The Buddha says that's ludicrous, that's foolish, that's ignorant and delusional. And that's why we suffer, because usually we don't see reality correctly. We think we have a permanent self, and that self takes over. It isolates it from others, ourselves from others, and creates all these desires that are ultimately meaningless. Many of them are meaningless. These desires that need to be satisfied, these thirsts and cravings that need to be satiated and fulfilled, and don't lead to perpetual happiness. Some of these desires are attained and acquired for sure, but then unhappiness creeps back in. The happiness from a desire being fulfilled eventually leads to unhappiness, because then you're still unhappy. So then you come up with another desire that you need to fulfill, and then another desire, and another desire. And of course, not all desires based off the egotistical self are fulfilled. So we become really delusional, really self-centered, self-absorbed, superficial, hollow, shallow people, sadly. But nothing's permanent, nothing lasts, nothing endures. Nothing has the ability to escape or overcome change. We all change. We all change. So thus we aren't perpetual. So there is no permanent self. And thus we become truly selfless. Not selfish, not self-absorbed or self-centered, but selfless. And thus the focus isn't on gratifying a self, an egotistical self, and all of the desires that flow from it, but on helping others. There's no self to focus on, so we focus on helping others, serving others, loving others. Our capacity and depth to love others becomes so much more meaningful and complex and deeper with that type of understanding of reality. So that's Buddhism. Buddhism does believe in Atman, or it rejects the Atman, but still believes in Nirvana. It still believes in samsara. Excuse me. So all those smaller pieces, parts, aggregates, skandhas, all those smaller pieces, they reincarnate. They never equal or yield a permanent self. But you add them up, and it equals an impermanent notion. So thus there is no permanent self. But those smaller pieces, they exist. Obviously our body exists. We have emotions. We have thoughts. We have a consciousness and a character. Those are the 5 great parts that the Buddha taught. But none of those are permanent. So to add them up and say it equals a permanent self doesn't make sense. But we reviewed that. Those 5 skandhas, those 5 pieces and parts, go through another massive change, and that's called reincarnation. So the changes occur in your current life to your body, your emotions, your thoughts, your character, and your consciousness. And they just continue to change. They change once again in this cycle of change known as reincarnation, rebirth, samsara. You don't want to be reincarnated. You want to get to nirvana. So, known as heaven, maybe in Western religions, the afterlife scenario, you have this notion of moksha in Hinduism that's known as nirvana in Buddhism. Nirvana is eliminate, eradicate, make extinct, blow out, cool down is nirvana. That's union with the Buddha, some other type of transcendent reality. You become fully awakened through a monistic view of reality, realizing that there is no self. You become a much more loving, caring, selfless person. So there's no more need to be reborn. Your negative karma has been extinguished. You become a full Buddha, fully awakened. Fully awakened. How do you do all this? Follow the teachings of the Buddha. There is yoga, but you can follow the teachings of the Buddha too. The Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Three Marks of Reality. So those are his main teachings. Follow his teachings, his Dharma. Dharma. Dharma is teaching in the Buddhist understanding of that term. There are sacred texts in Buddhism. You do have the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon, also known as the Tripitaka. It's the same thing. Canon is just your collection of writings that you've deemed authoritative and credible, legitimate, unless you include them in your collection. Pali is the language that it was written in, one version of it. The Tripitaka is the three baskets. Tree, three, Pitaka, basket. Eventually his followers wrote down his teachings and divided into three categories, and then put those categories into separate baskets, so the three baskets. So there is a sacred text in Buddhism. And there's another listing there. There is three main branches of Buddhism: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Theravada only has the Pali Canon or Tripitaka. And then Mahayana and Vajrayana do add additional discourses and writings too, to their collection of holy books or sacred scripture, just so you know that. Confucianism has sacred texts. It has the Analects. It has the five books, the five collections, or its main text. And then Shinto, the native religion of Japan, has the Kojiki as its major sacred text, kind of outlining also Japanese history. Taoism has a sacred text, the Tao Te Ching, which is actually the second most published book in all of human history, second only to the Bible, if you didn't know. But Confucianism is focused on order. Let's provide order and structure to society and human culture, and then I'll bring about harmony with the divine, who is somewhat impersonal. The notion of the Tao. The Tao is the way or path. So let's bring natural order through rationality, education, moral virtues. Confucius's teachings focus heavily on following certain virtues within all your relationships in life, those around you in the world, culture itself. And then harmony will be restored. Harmony within society and the universe. So we should live in balanced, harmonious relations with the living and the dead, nature around us, and now cultivate and create a harmonious culture, a society of people doing good with each other will create a good society itself. A society can't be good if the people within it aren't doing good. So worship does have rituals, it does have prayers, offerings. There you can worship heaven, you can worship ancestors and spirits, but God is still somewhat impersonal in Confucianism. But there's the five main virtues that you read about. There's the five great relationships that you read about too, two big teachings in Confucianism. Taoism is more focused on the way or the path. Instead of, yes, it has virtues, but it's not as political or cultural as Confucianism is. Taoism is more natural, focusing on the Tao. Being too aggressive, being too assertive doing too much, being pulled in all these different directions and allowing yourself to be pulled in all these different directions, that leads to chaos. Harmony is unity with the Tao, is just doing what's natural. Water flowing through a river is just doing what it naturally does. It achieves so much. Water flowing through a river can actually curve rocks that are jagged and have harsh corners to them that can cut. Water flowing over that rock eventually softens and dulls down and makes that stone, that rock, more curved. The water's doing nothing, but at the same point it's fulfilling its natural purpose and thus does so much. We want to be like that water flowing through a river, and that allows us to become one with the Tao, a mystical union with the Tao. Only do what's natural, which is what's necessary. Only do what's necessary with what is natural. Taoism. Taoism goes back to the same time as Confucianism, roughly. You see Taoism, and then that's founder, and then you see Confucianism here. Some basic points there. So it's not as personal notion of God like you have in Western religions. So some would say it's not really a God-centered religion, but the notion of divinity and sacredness, supernaturalism, those still definitely exist in Confucianism and Taoism, as they do in Shinto. Shinto is focused on the kami. Shinto is the native religion of Japan, going back to around 600 BC. There are probably 100,000 kami Shinto shrines still all throughout Japan. Beautiful points in nature is usually where many Shinto shrines are actually located. But Shinto, the religion of Japan, has kind of waned and decreased in influence somewhat since democracy was forced upon Japan since they're being conquered in World War II in 1945. And so emperor worship, the emperor was the ruler of Japan politically in a governmental sense, but also theologically, was seen like as the divine on earth. That was taken over by a parliamentarian democracy, so Shinto has kind of declined in influence. But a lot of societal focus of doing good and following the kami, these spirits, interwoven in nature. But everyone's responsible to do good, helping recraft society. But in Shinto, the notion of purpose would definitely be just recognition, venerating worship the kami, the gods of the way, the divine beings of the way, what Shinto literally means. And the Kojiki is its most well-known, well-used sacred text, though it does have several, in the native religion of Japan, Shinto. So there's our brief overview of Eastern religions. Obviously, we spent time on Hinduism and Buddhism because they're part of the 5 great major world religions. And then briefly, we discussed Confucianism, Taoism, and Shinto in our quick overview of Eastern religions for this week. Good luck, everyone. Take care.